We now come to the backbench debate on Holocaust Memorial Day, and I call Peter Prinsley, who will speak for up to 15 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and it's an honour to be able to open this debate for Holocaust Memorial Debate this year. So, in the Sunday Times of the week before last, the Chief Rabbi described the dilemma of the teacher faced with the question of what to do on Holocaust Memorial Day. Aware of the polarising impact of the events of October 2023 and the terrible loss of life in Gaza, may be simple just not to have an event at all this year. In 2023, 2,000 schools held events to mark Holocaust Memorial Day. In 2024, 1,200 schools. In 2025, 854, and less this year, almost certainly. He asked the question that we are all asking. As we lose the last survivors, the eyewitnesses of the Holocaust, how will we keep our oft-repeated promise to them that we will never forget? The Chief Rabbi speaks of the moral foundation of our society and how the Holocaust did not start from nothing. It started with the normalisation of division, prejudice and hatred, building indeed on the oldest hatred of all. There is a warning here for all of us. Do not imagine that this can never happen again in our time. That is why it is so important to remember. And that is why I believe it is so important for us to build a national Holocaust memorial, and why I am so pleased that this was included in the government's legislation. Let's just get it done before the last eyewitnesses pass into the history books. Yeah. Now, I have lived with my family in East Anglia for 30 years. I'm a part of the Jewish community of Norwich, a member of the synagogue and a past president of the community. There is a beautiful restored synagogue and a small, thriving community. The community was established in the 19th century following the arrival of Jewish people from Europe, largely fleeing discrimination and persecution. I am delighted that this year, Mrs. M. Leverton, aged 80 plus, and her husband, Mr. B. Leverton, aged 90 plus, were both awarded the British Empire Medal in the New Year's Honours for their lifelong service to the community. But this is not the first Jewish community of Norwich. Jewish people came to England with the Normans. Communities formed in many cities under the protection of the Crown, at Norwich, Bury St Edmunds, King's Lynn and Thetford, all over the successfully growing economy of East Anglia. Now, money lending was forbidden to Christians. So Jews began to work in finance and money lending. A special exchequer of the Jews was established by the Crown to collect taxes. Great chests with multiple locked clasps were made to keep exchequer rolls and documents. There were 5 locks with keys held by Crown agents and local citizens so that it could be opened together to prevent any disagreements. Lately, I discovered just such a chest in a church at North Creek. The County Archive in Norwich contains hundreds of medieval property leases and documents, many written in Hebrew. They have curious wavy crenellated margins, for they were written in duplicates to enable matching copies to ensure there were no forgeries. These are called indentures. The leases have allowed a detailed map of the ancient city centre to be drawn, showing the location and the ownership of the houses, the location of a synagogue, the school, and the physician, for there were Jewish doctors in Norwich 1,000 years before I was appointed. On King Street, there is a great merchant's house which still stands. It was the house of Isaac Jernert, the oldest house of Jewish habitation in England, and the vaulted crypt is unaltered since the time of Jernert, who was the financier of the cathedral and much else besides. The house is presently in need of restoration, and there is a plan to create a centre for the study of anti-Semitism with a Department of Jewish Studies at the university. Never has this been more essential. So which, I ask, was the first country in Europe to expel the Jews? It was right here in Parliament in 1290 that King Edward decreed that the Jews must leave. not allowed to return until the time of Oliver Cromwell, hundreds of years later. So do not imagine that this is a uniquely German idea. This is an ancient hatred, and with the leave of the House, I will tell you something of this, if I may. For it was in Norwich in 1140 that the Jews were falsely accused of the murder of a boy called William, to use his blood for sacrifice, something Jews never do. This is the infamous blood libel, which sparked anti-Semitic hatred all over England and echoes throughout the ages, even until this day. Some 20 years ago, a shopping centre was under construction. A medieval well full of skeletons was revealed, 17 skeletons from 3 families, including children. A BBC hidden history documentary brought this story to our attention when it was revealed that these were almost certainly Jewish skeletons. The bones were handed to the local community, and here I must name my dear departed friend Mr. Clive Roth, who insisted that the bones be given a dignified Jewish burial. Now I held these bones in my hand, and there was a large hole in the side of the skull, not obviously a natural hole, even after all these years. DNA studies by the Natural History Museum here in London showed that there were genetic matches to contemporary British Jews. So here we have absolute evidence, scientific evidence, of an English pogrom in 1190. Anti-Semitism is not new. Now, Holocaust Memorial Day every year is so important. This year there has a theme of a bridge to the next generation. This weekend, I was privileged to attend the Holocaust Memorial Day events at Wells next the sea. Here, a small group of non-Jewish people have established a regular series of cultural events in the Maltings Arts Centre. Diana Cook spoke about her mother, Margot, who escaped in the days before the outbreak of the war to become a nurse and had lost all her family in the Holocaust. Diana is part of an oral history initiative called G2G, Generation to Generation, which carries the story of the Holocaust down the generation. Margot spoke little of her childhood, and only after she died did Diana fully appreciate the crucial importance of oral history and of generation to generation. And I thank her from my heart and soul. On Monday, I attended a most moving service at the Foreign Office, and I must thank the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, the Embassy of Israel, and the Chargé d'Affaires, Daniela Gratzky-Eckstein, for this invitation. We heard the extraordinary testimony of Marla, who with her brother Ben Helfgott were the only members of a large family to survive. Now, I've heard Marla speak before, but the haunting testimony only amplifies in significance as you hear it again. And we heard the quite incredible voice of Cantor Turgle, the grandson of Gina, the bride of Belson, who married the British soldier who liberated her. He sang the prayer for the departed, El Malay Rachamin, God full of compassion, the prayer which asked God to grant rest to the souls of the deceased. And Holocaust Memorial Day itself, I was so proud to stand in the Cathedral of Bury St Edmunds, alongside local Jewish citizens and the school children of Suffolk, and to make the declaration of remembrance as the first Jewish MP for this ancient town. For we are living in a time of increasing polarisation and division. This is our struggle. I've seen the marches and they fill me with foreboding. We've seen the protests. We've seen the rise of the far-right so-called populists all over the world, including right here on Westminster Bridge. Too often, the legitimate street protests against the action of the Israeli government have simply degenerated into shocking anti-Semitic chanting. The murderous attacks on the Jews in Yom Kippur in Manchester and the attack in Australia did not arise from nowhere. This is our real and present danger, and we must not underestimate it, for this is pervasive. Sure.
Gentlemen, he's made a fascinating opening speech, and I congratulate him on the debate. And could I just ask him to re-emphasise the point he just made, that by grouping an entire religion, race, ethnicity to the actions of a government is an entirely anti-Semitic act?
I absolutely agree with you. that is exactly the case. And that's an extremely well-made point. Thank you for that. So the banning of a local Jewish MP from a local school in Bristol was simply an outrage. We received messages from families of isolated pupils in rural East Anglian schools where there are persistent taunts and worse, and the schools are simply unable to cope. Resources must be found to address this problem. This is urgent. Now, anti-Semitism, which never disappeared from this country, exploded after the events of October the 7th, 2023, even before the actions of the Israel Defence Force. There has been a terrible war in Gaza, but the origins of the political problems are ancient and complex, and it is not the responsibility of law-abiding Jewish citizens of this country who have been intimidated and vilified. I welcome the measures that our government has announced to address this. So I am a Jewish MP for Bury St Edmunds and Stowmarket, the very first Jewish MP for the town, which was indeed the first to expel its Jews in 1190, following the slaughter of 53 Jewish citizens, commemorated at a teardrop in the Abbey Gardens. So history has come full circle. There is no greater honour in my life and no greater duty than to ensure that we will always remember them. Thank you.
Yeah. The question is, as on the order paper, Bob Blackman.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and it's an honour to follow an excellent opening speech from the Honourable Member for Bury St Edmunds and Stowmarket. I congratulate him on the way he's introduced this debate. I declare my interest as the Chairman of the All-Party Group for the Holocaust Memorial and Education Centre, Co-Chairman of the All-Party Group for Israel, and as the sponsor of this year's Holocaust Memorial reception in Portcullis House on behalf of the Holocaust Education Trust. So we gather today to mark Holocaust Memorial Day, which commemorates the liberation of Auschwitz-Birkenau on the 27th of January 1945. The moment exposed to the world the full horror of the Nazi regime's systematic murder of 6 million Jewish men, women and children. And for the BBC, Jewish men and children. But Holocaust Memorial Day is also a moment to remember the millions of others who were persecuted and murdered by the Nazis, Roma, disabled people, political dissidents and others. We remember not only to honour the victims, but to understand how such an atrocity became possible and how we must never allow it to happen again. So the Holocaust didn't begin with the gas chambers and death camps, and too often we forget the context. The decades before, when hatred was allowed to grow in Germany, when prejudice became normalised, and when language, institutions and social norms were slowly corroded. Now, after the Great War, Germany was defeated and economically shattered. The Treaty of Versailles imposed territorial losses, military restrictions and severe reparations, the burden of which fell heavily on ordinary people in Germany. The Weimar Republic, although democratic in structure, was fragile and economic catastrophe soon followed. In fact, hyperinflation in the early 1920s left Germans literally burning paper money to keep warm because the currency had literally fallen away in value. Widespread poverty took hold, and in times of despair, many people searched for simple explanations and for the scapegoats. So it's within that climate that the Nazi Party rose to prominence. Hitler and his supporters offered simplistic answers to complex problems. They promised national revival, strength and unity while identifying enemies within. Jews were portrayed not as fellow citizens, but as outsiders, dehumanised and blamed for Germany's defeat, its economic hardships and the perceived decline of society. Hatred wasn't accidental, it was systematic, deliberate and relentlessly reinforced. So when the Nazis came to power in 1933, anti-Semitism became state policy. Just imagine that. State policy to outlaw a particular religion. Persecution began not with mass violence, but with exclusion. Jewish civil servants were dismissed. Jewish businesses were boycotted. Jewish professionals were barred from practicing law, medicine and teaching. Those measures were designed to isolate, humiliate and impoverish an entire community. It's important to stress that whilst most people didn't actively participate in persecution, most chose to look away. Silence, passivity and indifference allowed injustice to become embedded and ultimately unstoppable. Persecution soon escalated. The Nuremberg laws of 1935 stripped Jews of citizenship and basic rights, reducing them from equal members of society to subjects of the state. Violence became overt. In November 1938, Kristallnacht marked a decisive turning point. Synagogues were destroyed, Jewish homes and businesses were attacked, and thousands were arrested by the state, not by mobs acting alone, but by the authority itself. With the outbreak of the Second World War, persecution turned into annihilation. Jews were forced into ghettos, and we will hear, no doubt, the harrowing testimonies of overcrowding, hunger, disease and despair. From 1941 onwards, death camps such as Auschwitz-Birkenau, Treblinka and Saville were constructed for one purpose alone: mass murder. Trains arrived from across Europe. People were selected, exploited and killed on an industrial scale. Now, there were some that resisted, often at immense personal risk, and they remind us that choices were always possible. But they were the exception, not the norm. I'll give way to my honourable friend.
I'd like to thank my honourable friend who again is making a fantastic speech. But one of my honourable friends shares with me the horror and disgust that yesterday a member of the public thought it was entirely appropriate to dress as a prisoner of one of the concentration camps. Surely this is the hatred that my honourable friend is describing.
I thank my honourable friend for that, and indeed I condemn those actions and all those actions that seek to, in some way, shape or form, glorify or justify the Holocaust. So the lesson matters profoundly today. Holocaust Memorial Day plays a vital part in educating the public about the dangers of prejudice, discrimination and hatred. Dangers that, if we leave unchecked, can escalate once again into violence and even genocide. It honours survivors and preserves their testimony, particularly, as the honourable member alluded to, the number of first-hand witnesses sadly diminishes. Now, the theme for this year, Bridging Generations, is therefore a powerful call to action. The responsibility of remembrance does not end with the survivors themselves. It must be passed on to their children, grandchildren, and to all of us, so that memory becomes responsibility. This matters because anti-Semitism in the UK today remains at alarmingly high levels. Following the Hamas terrorist attack on Israel on the 7th of October 2023, anti-Semitic incidents surged dramatically. Now, according to the Community Security Trust, 1,521 anti-Semitic incidents were recorded in the first half of 2025 alone, the second highest total ever recorded for that period. While lower than the record year of 24, this still represents a sustained and deeply troubling level of hostility, far above the pre-October the 7th averages. I'll give way to my honourable neighbour.
As the honourable gentleman knows, I do not always agree with him, but I very much agree with the case that he is making today and the way in which he is speaking. He raises the surge in anti-Semitism in the UK at the moment. Would he agree with me? There is a particular need for Ofcom to crack down on online hatred, particularly anti-Semitism, but also Islamophobic tweets, as both the Jewish community and many other faiths are subject to terrifying levels of online hatred.
I thank the honourable gentleman for that intervention and my neighbour. The sad reality is that following my question to the Deputy Prime Minister yesterday, my social media accounts were loaded with anti-Semitic tropes. It's a disgrace, and Ofcom have to take action. And indeed, it is our duty to ensure that hate speech is never allowed to continue. I believe in free speech, but I don't believe in preaching hatred to one another, regardless of their religion. And action has to be taken in that regard. So Greater London and Greater Manchester remain hotspots of anti-Semitism. We've seen the attack on the synagogue in Manchester during Yom Kippur, and online anti-Semitism, as the Honourable Gentleman just referred to, now accounts for well over a third of all incidents. Holocaust-related abuse appears with disturbing frequency, including a sharp rise in the glorification of the Holocaust itself. Yeah. Now, behind these stats lies a chilling reality. Many Jewish people in Britain feel unsafe, unwelcome, or forced to hide their identity in public. And surveys suggest that around half have considered leaving the UK due to anti-Semitism. That should trouble every one of us. We must be honest about the ways in which contemporary anti-Semitism often disguises itself. Increasingly, anti-Israel activism functions as a Trojan horse for anti-Semitism, allowing ancient prejudice to re-enter public discourse under the cover of political critique. Now, legitimate criticism of any government is, of course, entirely valid. But when Israel becomes uniquely demonised, when Zionism is used as a slur, when Jewish institutions and individuals are targeted, regardless of their views, we are no longer in the realm of political debate. CST data shows that a significant proportion of anti-Semitic incidents now blend anti-Zionist language with classic anti-Semitic tropes. Claims of secret control, collective guilt, or global conspiracy. On campuses, online platforms, and public demonstrations, such as yesterday, Jewish students and citizens are increasingly made to feel responsible for who they are. This not only undermines free speech, it poisons it. We must also confront the disturbing rise of Holocaust inversion, the grotesque distortion that portrays Jews or Israel as the new Nazis. This is not merely offensive rhetoric, it threatens and trivialises the Shoah, inverts reality, and inflicts profound harm on survivors and their families. Equating the Star of David with a swastika or accusing the Jewish state of genocide is not historical analysis, it's anti-Semitism. Yes. And we must be clear and unequivocal in condemning it. Hear, hear. So on Holocaust Memorial Day, we should also acknowledge the historical link between the Holocaust and the modern state of Israel. Zionism long predates the Second World War, but the genocide of European Jewry underscored with devastating clarity the need for a Jewish homeland, a place of refuge and self-determination. Many Holocaust survivors helped build that nation, carrying the scars of the camps with them. Attempts to delegitimise Israel ignore this history and risk erasing the fundamental lesson of never again. Finally, Madam Deputy Speaker, I want to turn to the future. Last week, the Holocaust Memorial Act 2026 received royal assent, paving the way for the National Holocaust Memorial and Learning Centre in Victoria Tower Gardens, beside this very Parliament. Proposed by a cross-party commission more than a decade ago, this memorial will honour the victims and education generations to come. Started, in fact, by Lord Cameron and supported on a cross-party basis. And as the Honourable Member in the introduction to this debate said, we must get that memorial built before the last of the survivors are no longer with us. The location matters. It will stand as a permanent reminder at the heart of our democracy of where hatred can lead when left unchallenged. So as we remember the victims today, we will also reaffirm our responsibility to challenge anti-Semitism wherever it appears, to defend democratic values and human dignity, and ensure that history is never forgotten nor distorted. And when we see demonstrations and attempts to blockade Jewish businesses, restaurants and synagogues, we must call it out for what it is, anti-Semitism, pure and simple. So remembrance is not only about the past, it is a warning for the present and a duty we owe to future generations. I, and I believe the whole House, will recommit our determination to do just that.
Charlotte Nichols.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The theme for Holocaust Memorial Day 2026 is Bridging Generations, in recognition of the fact that, as the remaining survivors who can directly bear witness to the atrocities of the Holocaust pass away, that living memory must become collective memory. As Jews, we know all about collective memory. The late Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks of blessed memory said, "One of the most important halachic responses to tragedy is the act of remembering, yizkor. More than it has history, the Jewish people has memory. There is no word for history in the Tanakh, and modern Hebrew had to borrow one, historia. But the word zachor, remember, occurs no less than 169 times in the Hebrew Bible. The difference between them is this: history is someone else's story. Memory is my story. In history, we recall what happened so that it becomes part of us and who we are. We cannot bring the dead to life, but we can keep their memory alive." This Shabbat, Jews around the world will be reading Parashat Bashalach. The Torah portion opens with the Pharaoh pursuing the Israelites into the desert and the miracle of the splitting of the Red Sea. It ends with victory over the Amalekites, the first enemy that the Israelites face upon escaping Egypt. There are so many biblical teachings through which we can approach the Shoah in Bashalach, particularly in grappling with the evil of Amalek and Pharaoh, and in contemplating the act of remembrance itself through how we are commanded to commemorate these events. But this year I came across a perspective both so subtle in the closeness of the reading of it and so completely striking in its depth. I've been reading Esh Kodesh, written by Rabbi Kalonymus Kalman Shapira of blessed memory, the Rebbe of the Warsaw Ghetto. Composed between 1939 and 1942, it is a truly astonishing body of work. Reflecting on Parashat Bashalach, he notes that in the text, Exodus 13:21 begins, "And God goes before them, by day with a pillar of cloud to guide them along the way, and by night with a pillar of fire providing them with light, to travel day and night." And that this is the first place in which the text speaks in the present tense. With extraordinary faith and courage, and recognizing the bitter reality they are living through, he concludes that we must use the judgments and suffering we endure properly, utilizing them to worship God, to keep going day and night. That this present tense speaks of the presence of God in their midst at a time of unimaginable privation, and is a source of strength for them to draw on, is profoundly moving as a contemporary reader. Later on in the parasha, Exodus 15:1, it reads, "And they spoke to say, I will sing to God for his great victory." Noting here the future tense, Rabbi Shapira says, "Already when still in Egypt, they could see God's salvation, and so they were able in their minds to sing in the future." To say implies that they succeeded in establishing this for future generations. Rabbi Shapira didn't live to see this victory, to sing in the future. He was murdered in Action Erntefest, Operation Harvest Festival, at Trovniki concentration camp on November the 3rd, 1943. Jewish prisoners were separated from non-Jewish prisoners, and up to 43,000 Jews at the Medarnik, Poniatowa, and Trovniki concentration camps were killed in 2 days, the single largest German massacre of Jews in the Holocaust. In all 3 camps, Jews were forced to strip naked and walk into dug trenches where they were shot dead. Loud music was played to cover the sound of the gunfire. Rabbi Shapira's writing, however, survived to inspire future generations, buried in milk canisters as part of the Oneg Shabbat Underground Archive, established in 1940 by Emanuel Ringenblum and a secret group of scholars and writers to document the suffering, resistance, and daily life of Jews in the Warsaw Ghetto, ensuring their story wasn't lost. They said, "It must all be recorded with not a single fact omitted, and when the time comes, as it surely will, let the world read and know what the murderers have done." We mourn the 6 million Jews murdered in the Holocaust. We mourn the lives cut short, the lives never lived, the children and grandchildren never born, the art, the music, the literature never written, the enormous loss to humanity itself of a tragedy at a scale we can barely fathom that reverberates throughout modern history and into our present. But as we mourn, we remember. As Jews, we can take forward our cultures, teachings, and traditions to future generations, as we have always done from the Exodus onwards, denying Hitler what the theologian Emil Fackenheim called a posthumous victory. Many Jewish communities around the world read and learn Torah from Czech scrolls from the desolated synagogues of Bohemia and Moravia, honouring the communities who were killed and keeping the flame of their memory alive. I will give way.
Thank my wonderful friend for giving way. She's making a powerful and educational speech, so thank you so much. Will you join me in thanking John Hajdu, MBE, who came to Brent yesterday to share with us his story of how he survived the Holocaust. And as a young boy, only surviving because a non-Jewish family hid him in a cupboard for days on end. Will you join me in just thanking him for sharing his story so that we can keep that alive?
I thank my honourable friend for her intervention and share her thanks to both to the survivor that she mentioned, but also that generation of survivors who were so determined to ensure that their stories were carried forward so that we can learn from them. Honourable members and right honourable members can visit the museum not far from here at Westminster Synagogue, home of the Czech Memorial Scrolls Trust, to see the scrolls I referred to and artefacts from these communities. Remembrance of the Holocaust, however, is a society-wide effort, something that Jews cannot undertake alone. At a time of rising anti-Semitism globally, when Jews in Manchester and in Bondi Beach are killed just for being Jews, this same anti-Semitic poison is again taking root and must be confronted. We should remember the evils of the past to fight the evils of the present, taking strength from the everyday acts of resistance, large and small, and bringing their stories with us to secure for all of us a safe and secure future. 8 decades on from the Holocaust, it's more important now than ever.
Tom Morrison.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm honoured to be here at this debate, and I'd like to thank the member for Bury St Edmunds and Stowmarket for leading this debate today and opening with such an incredibly moving speech. Genocide does not just happen. There is always a path. There is always a terrifying and evil journey towards it. The intention to destroy a group of people is an unspeakable idea. It's difficult to comprehend, and yet it has happened not once, but multiple times across the globe. Madam Deputy Speaker, remembering the Holocaust is not just a Jewish issue, it's a human one. Education, reflection, and crucially action become more and more important each day as we face increasingly fractured communities, inflammatory online rhetoric, and casual othering of minority groups. Recent events, both in the UK and abroad, reiterate that never again cannot rest on remembrance alone. It needs conscious action. The Nazi regime systematically murdered 6 million Jews, including 1.5 million children. That's 6 million stories, 6 million people who loved, 6 million people who added immeasurable value to this world. That murderous regime also killed Roma and Sinti people, disabled people, gay men, political opponents, Jehovah's Witnesses, and others that they deemed undesirable. In total, around 10 million people were murdered. But the Holocaust was not carried out by mobs and Nazis alone. It was enabled by a systemic involvement and compliance of institutions, including the police, civil servants, universities, courts, and local authorities, the very institutions that were created to protect and serve. Instead, these institutions enforced discriminatory laws, facilitated deportations, and normalised othering and eventually murder. Prejudice became policy when institutions failed to act against the hatred. We are talking about a scale of suffering and terror that is beyond comprehension, and that is why the personal stories are so crucial to our learning and reflection. So I'd like to share some stories of my constituents who survived. In 1939, Leonard Kaufmann's uncle managed to secure a place for him on the Kinder transport, leaving behind his siblings and parents who later died. At 4 years old, Leonard remembers sitting on a bar stool on his arrival to the UK, all alone, waiting to be collected. Not able to speak English, scared, and completely unsure of what was to come. Leonard went on to lead a successful career and have a happy family home in Gatley, despite experiencing one of the hardest starts to life anyone could imagine. He was a proud administrator at the Yeshurun Synagogue, which sits proudly in the heart of Gatley. Peter Currer was taken in by a Quaker family in Manchester with his brother and parents after they learned the SS were coming for his father. And later, Peter selflessly volunteered considerable time to the establishment of a retirement home in Didsbury for Jewish refugees. Martin Hyman shared with me the story of his mother, who grew up in the 1930s Vienna and was expelled from school simply for being Jewish. Aged just 13, she was sent alone to Britain on the Kindertransport. She never saw her parents again. Madam Deputy Speaker, sadly, these stories are not unusual. Martin said to me, in 1938, 272 Jews were recorded as having lived on the street in Vienna where my mum grew up. She was one of only 13 who survived the Holocaust. They reflect the experience of thousands of children whose lives were saved only because others acted. And I'm asking everyone in this house today to imagine the pain and suffering inflicted from just these singular stories and multiply that by 1,000, and then multiply it again. I would like to pay tribute to Paul Porges, a survivor of the Holocaust who was not only my friend but a mentor to me. Paul was born in Czechoslovakia to parents Victor and Olga. During the Second World War, his family was deported to a ghetto in Warsaw. After falling ill, Paul was separated from his parents, but was helped to escape by the Polish resistance. He eventually made it to England, where he earned a doctorate in chemistry at the University of London before moving to Cheadle with his wife Joan. He was one of the first Liberal councillors to represent the Cheadle area and did so for 4 decades. And during his time on the council, Paul held many positions, including the Equal Opportunity Special Panel and the Social Inclusion and Community Cohesion Working Party. His experience so early on in life drove his passion to prioritise inclusion and community in Cheadle, and he also fought tirelessly for refugees in our region. Paul knew more than anyone just how important it was to be the voice of those that could not defend themselves. And I was deeply honoured to replace Paul on Stockport Council, and still to this day, I try to ensure that I live up to his legacy, and I miss him dearly. It is no secret that hate crimes have risen year on year. Misinformation continues to spread like wildfire online, and politics is becoming increasingly polarised. I visited the Community Security Trust earlier this week and heard directly about the work and resource that goes into ensuring Jewish communities are protected. But heartbreakingly, the Heaton Park synagogue attack on Yom Kippur just 3 months ago shows that despite every effort to ensure people are safe and secure, the evil of anti-Semitism poses a real, murderous threat to our Jewish communities. Latest statistics published in October show that Jewish people had a higher rate of religious hate crimes targeted towards them rather than any other faith group. We have a duty here today to remember, reflect, and take action to stamp out this hatred. Martin Hyman highlights that his grandparents, like many others, believed that civilization, culture, and the rule of law would protect them, but this was not the case. The Holocaust was not a sudden collapse of morality, but the endpoint of an insidious process in which discrimination was legalised, exclusion was enforced, and dehumanisation made routine by ordinary people. Education plays a critical role in responding to this. Organisations such as the Northern Holocaust Education Group and My Voice Project work to ensure survivor testimony and lived experience continue to reach the schools and communities. The Holocaust Centre North provides a permanent exhibition, learning programmes and archives rooted in local survivor and refugee stories, helping young people and the wider public understand how a global atrocity unfolded through ordinary lives. Madam Deputy Speaker, when people feel connected and invested in common values, they are better able to work together to address division and tackle hatred. The Common Ground Award is an important initiative that goes some way to support this aim, and I hope the government will keep on funding it. But the government must also publish the Community Cohesion Strategy, which was promised last year, so communities can work together to confront all forms of extremism through building understanding and trust. Britain is a country of shared values and has a history of being a nation that offers a hand to those in need. We must never forget this, and we must continuously pursue this aim. We celebrate that people in this country should be able to live free from discrimination, no one's rights or dignity should ever be taken away or compromised because of who they are, where they come from, or what they believe. We must not lose sight of that, even though there are some that seek to undermine it. Madam Deputy Speaker, a Jewish man in Manchester recently said to the Manchester Evening News, "My daughter, she wears the Star of David, but she puts it away. Ours are the only children that go to schools behind fences with guards." This cannot continue, so we must revert to our shared values, celebrate our differences, and call out all forms of hatred and bigotry. Never again cannot rest on remembrance alone. It requires conscious action every day. Holocaust Memorial Day offers an opportunity to reflect not only on what happened, but on the responsibility we all have to ensure that the legacy of people like Paul Porges never fades.
Paul Waugh.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I pay tribute to the members for Bury St Edmunds and to Warrington North for such powerful and moving testimony that we've seen today. They're a tribute to their community and to their constituents. Holocaust Memorial Day is a time when we remember the 6 million Jewish men, women and children murdered by the Nazis and by their collaborators during the Holocaust. And the theme, as many have said, of this year's Memorial Day is bridging generations. And it's the solemn duty of all of us in this place and beyond it who've had the privilege of meeting Holocaust survivors to pass on their testimony to younger generations so that we may all bear witness collectively to their suffering and to their memory. On that note, it was a real honour last week, as some have already said, to meet 95-year-old Marla Trubich, MBE, in Parliament, and to hear her very moving testimony of how she and her brother were the only members of her family to survive the Nazi Holocaust, following her imprisonment in Ravensbrück and Belsenbergen camps. Many members will agree just how heartbreaking it was to hear of her pleading with the SS Guard not to put her on a train. Marla told me afterwards how proud she was of her brother Ben, who went on to represent Britain at the Olympics as a weightlifter. Ben, who passed away in 2023, was one of the 700 Jewish youngsters taken to Cumbria from the death camps. And Ike Alterman, who passed away at age 97 in December last year, was the last surviving Greater Manchester member of that group of so-called Windermere children. I mention Ike because his story is well known by the children of Rochdale, particularly in Fairlinge Park High School, where he visited 3 years ago to share his experiences. Ike recalled picking sprouts in the bitter Polish winter for the SS officers' Christmas dinner. He and other Jews had no proper clothing, no shoes. Ike strapped straw to his feet to walk in the snow. The SSF officer said that if he and fellow children sang Silent Night, they'd get a bonus, a ladle of warm water to put sprout skins in. To this day, I've never touched sprouts again, Ike said. Ike was just 13 when his family were lined up in the town square alongside other Jews. He saw his mother, his sister, his brother led away by men with rifles. Later, he found out they were likely sent to Treblinka, the extermination camp. At Birkenau, Ike's job was to take bodies from gas chambers to the crematoriums. At Birkenau, he said, they had 4 chimneys and they were glowing 24 hours a day, day and night. That was invaluable personal testimony to the children of Rochdale from someone who was there. That's someone who can't be denied, whose story cannot be denied, and to whom we still remember with great fondness. Despite his passing, Ike's testimony lives on because his talk to students was captured on video and is shown by the school every year, thanks to the great efforts of excellent teachers such as the Holocaust education lead in Rochdale, in Fairlinge Park, Adele Turner. Now, Fairlinge Park has a legacy beacon status as one of the schools under the umbrella of the University College London Centre for Holocaust Education, and it's developed a special Holocaust Ambassadors and Youth Champions programme. Its youth champions are pupils from Year 9 who design and lead the extracurricular lunchtime and after-school lessons on the Holocaust for younger children in the school, beautifully bridging generations even within their school, which is again the theme of this year's memorial. Last week, Greater Manchester's commemoration of Holocaust Memorial Day featured a video of Fairlinge Park High School pupils, Abiha Imran, Willow Greenwood and Dylan Ogden, as they joined Andy Burnham to interview Tommy Commerly, another Holocaust survivor. Tommy revealed he'd spoken to 27,000 students in the 10 years of his work with the Holocaust Education Trust. 27,000 students who remember his story. And his advice to the next generation was simple. The one word that immediately pops into my mind, he said, is tolerance. Just look at other people in the world and accept that we each have our own way of living and habits. Just be respectful of that and live peacefully side by side. Of course, this year has shown that anti-Semitism is not just the world's oldest hatred, it's very much a current one, fed by extremists that blame Jews across the globe for the actions of Israel's government. The Bondi Beach attack was truly appalling. But in the northwest, we will never forget the Heaton Park synagogue attack on the holiest day in the Jewish calendar, Yom Kippur. Remember Adrian Dorby, 53, and Melvin Kravitz, 66, who were killed in that attack on that dark day. Mark Levy, who many of us know in this place, is Manchester's Jewish Representative Council leader, and his father, Alan, is a chairman of the synagogue. They were both deeply affected by that incident and by the loss of their friends. Alan recently recalled how Adrian Dorby leapt up from his seat and ran the length of the synagogue to help them hold shut the front doors from that terror attack before he was shot and killed. And it was truly disgusting that within hours of that attack, a local councillor in Rochdale shared on his Facebook page an article called False Flag. Could the Manchester synagogue attack be orchestrated? As clear a dog whistle, an anti-Semitic dog whistle, as clear as day. But there are glimmers of light amid the darkness. Mark Levy tells me his children marked their B'nai Mitzvah at Heaton Park recently, and a very powerful moment of resilience and remembering. The Holocaust and its teaching about not just the Nazi Holocaust, but genocides in Cambodia, Rwanda, Bosnia and Darfur has been part of the national curriculum for 35 years. The hatred based on race or religion, with victims scapegoated for sins they never committed, demonised, blamed and punished for sins and things that had nothing to do with them, becomes a narrative that curdles into deadly extremism. And our school children are taught that. But with young people online more than ever, it's not what happens in the classroom that really worries many of us. It's what happens outside it. The potential for them to come across anti-Semitic content, Holocaust denial and distortion is greater than ever. Conspiracy theories that the Holocaust never happened, the anti-Semitic theories that it was orchestrated or faked by Jewish people or Israel. Meanwhile, debate on X's Grok AI has been regular in this House in recent weeks. But not only has the platform's AI tool been denigrating and degrading women, Grok has generated multiple anti-Semitic comments, including praise for Hitler, denying the scope of the Holocaust, and using so-called Jewish-sounding surnames in the context of hate speech. I hope that ministers will engage with the Anti-Semitism Policy Trust to see how the Online Safety Act can actually crack down on memes like this on Reddit and other online platforms. As others have said, Holocaust Memorial Day is also a time to remember all the Roma, the Sinti people, gay men, disabled people, political opponents and others murdered by the Nazi killing machine. We remember too all those affected by the subsequent genocides in Cambodia, Rwanda, Darfur and Bosnia. And speaking of Bosnia, I want to say it was a truly humbling experience to visit the Srebrenica Memorial Centre and Cemetery in Bosnia last year. In July 1995, more than 8,000 Muslim men and boys were murdered by Serb paramilitaries, driven by religious, nationalist and ethnic hatred to commit the worst genocide on European soil since the Holocaust. I went to pay my respects, to meet the incredible Mothers of Srebrenica campaign group and to look at the very moving testimony in the Memorial Centre itself.
I just wanted to add my voice to the comments my friend was making about the Mothers of Srebrenica and Shepherd Enclaves Association. I've had the real honour of meeting them myself around a decade ago now, and the work that they do is absolutely extraordinary. So would he join me in encouraging all members of this House to take the opportunity to learn from them about what we can do to ensure that we don't carry the hate that caused them to lose their husbands and their sons into the future?
Honourable friend is absolutely right, and I would encourage all members of the House to take a trip to Srebrenica to see for themselves the mass graves there and the cemetery and the museum, which is incredibly moving. The Centre Director, Emir, and the Head of Oral History, Hassan, were encouraged to hear that Rochdale school children are taught about the Srebrenica genocide as part of the Holocaust education. And as the MP for Rochdale, it's my duty to remind everyone in my constituency of the horrors of October 7th, the worst pogrom of Jews since the Second World War. It's also, of course, my duty to call out the deaths of the men, women and children in Gaza that followed, and the need for testimony and evidence and accountability as important as ever. I signed the Holocaust Education Trust Book of Commitment in Parliament, part of their ongoing effort to educate children about the past and the present atrocities across the globe. It's only through education that we tackle the ignorance that fuels hatred. And the responsibility of remembrance doesn't end with the survivors. It lives on through their children, their grandchildren, and of course, through all of us. I just want to end, briefly if I can, I want to end with a poem sent to me by Zishan Shafkat, a 17-year-old student at Rochdale's Hotwood Hall College. In ashes of pain where names were erased, we stand together now, face to face, Muslim and Jew, hand in hand, guarding the truth that history demands. Never again our shared vow remains to honour the loss and break hatred's chain.
Sir Alec Shelbrooke.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I think it's important today, Madam Deputy Speaker, to start with some of the realities as vividly as I can in this debate. 6 million Jews murdered, deliberate attempt of the extermination of European Jews. I do think it is shameful that the BBC did not speak about Jews in their opening report about the Holocaust Memorial Day. 1 million of those Jews were children. 1 million were killed in the forests by bullets. In order for the Nazi regime to save bullets, they would make sure mothers held their babies to their heads so they could shoot both at the same time. One of the reasons that the gas chambers were put in place was not just to mechanicalise mass murder, but it's also because the German authorities recognised that there was a large psychological impact on the soldiers who were getting covered in brain matter and blood and murdering children. And so they decided that we must stop people feeling like that who are doing our bidding and make it far more simpler to herd the Jews into gas chambers and then get Jews themselves to remove those bodies and put them into the furnaces. The dehumanisation that happened to have millions of people accept what was going on. And I very much doubt that there were a great many people in Germany who didn't have an idea of what was going on. None truer than in the Bavarian region where Nazism really had its roots originally. But, because has been described, a long history of anti-Semitic growth led to the situation that when you had tough economic circumstances, when you'd come out of the war, when Germany felt that they had been punished by the whole of Europe despite not losing any territory, Adolf Hitler looked for a scapegoat. And that scapegoat was easy to find because of the decades and decades of hatred. Now, Germany paid a price for this, not just in terms of the price of the war and what happened, but it led to an incredible brain drain of talent, academic talent. Albert Einstein, as an example, driving these huge intellects, scientists, engineers, doctors out of Germany, because also, as has been mentioned, of the others who were murdered, but of course academics, anybody who may challenge the regime. And I'm afraid that we are now seeing levels of hostility in the United Kingdom, where many people are thinking to themselves they are better off leaving the United Kingdom. Our country will be far poorer for that, as well as the absolute moral outrage that today in the 21st century. The issues of 80 years ago are happening in front of our eyes. Madam Deputy Speaker, Leeds has a large and proud Jewish population. They are strong, they are resilient. Jews have been in Leeds for 150 years. They have added hugely to the fabric, the business, the community, the society that Leeds has become. I am proud that I have so many friends in the Jewish community, including, I'm proud to say, the Lord Mayor of Leeds, Councillor Dan Cohen. But they are frightened, Madam Deputy Speaker. They do find it difficult to go into Leeds city centre during Saturdays, during protests. And these are people who want to stand up to what is being said, but get pursued down the streets, get vicious abuse thrown at them. And I'm afraid, Madam Deputy Speaker, that I stand here today to not just remember the Holocaust, but to say remembrance is not enough. The speeches today have outlined, including the opening of my speech, what happened in the Holocaust. Other members have outlined the causes that led up to the Holocaust. But we are sitting back and we're not naming and shaming those who are encouraging the roots of where this started. Madam Deputy Speaker, I've said it before in this chamber and I'm going to say it again today. There is a councillor in Leeds, in my city of Leeds, Councillor Mothinali, who has now become the Deputy Leader of the Green Party. On 7/7, October the 7th, 2023, on that day, he put social media out praising Hamas and what they had achieved. He wasn't a councillor at that point, but he was a candidate. Now, this is a complex issue between freedom of speech, what agitation is. But there can be no doubt that he agitated, quite frankly, a mob to force the Jewish priest of the University of Leeds into hiding, Rabbi Dosh. The leader of the Green Party in Leeds, on Leeds City Council, Councillor Penny Stables, who is a councillor in my constituency, brushed this aside, saying that as he wasn't a councillor, it didn't matter what he'd said before he was elected. I really have to take issue with that, Madam Deputy Speaker, because as we have heard, it is this acceptance of people making these comments that eventually leads to history repeating itself. The Honourable Member for Rochdale just made some very, very important points. He was talking about fake news, how things twisted, and as I can't remember who it was now, Madam Deputy Speaker, but there was a member on the other side of the House who said that Ofcom must take a much stronger view as to content being put online. We know what's being poisoned in children's mind, and that's a different debate as we move forward. But I was knocking on doors, and a gentleman who must have been retired, I would say, told me as a fact, because he started off by absolutely laying into me for my support for Israel defending its security and what a disgrace of a human being I was, and then said, and I quote, "You know as well as I do, because you will have seen the video footage as I have, that Hamas had nothing to do with 7/7 and it was the Israelis who murdered their own people so they could invade Gaza." And he said that to me with absolute conviction. Absolute conviction. And that is the level of the hatred that is being generated because, Madam Deputy Speaker, the Israelis are Jews. And let's call this out. This is Jewish hatred. This is beyond politics. This is Jewish hatred. Madam Deputy Speaker, huge protests taking place, and people have a right to protest, and they have a right to condemn what they see going on in the world. But where are those same protests, Madam Deputy Speaker, for what is happening in Sudan? Where are those same protests against the Iranian regime, who may well have murdered people into 5 figures?
Will the Honourable Member take an intervention?
I will, the Honourable Gentleman.
I thank the Honourable Member who's making a really powerful speech. Would he agree with me that there is a strong suspicion that some of these hate marches which we've seen on the streets of Britain have been orchestrated by Iranian agents?
I think there is a lot of evidence to back that up. I think that the phrase passes me by, but the sphere of influence that Iran wanted to put in place through Iraq, through Syria, with their with Hamas, Hezbollah being their proxies to run things. And I think that we debate in here so many times of the malign influence of Iran, of the IRGC, and prescription of that body, that it is undoubtedly true. But we have tolerated things for too long. We tolerated streams of cars along Marylebone Road many years ago, beeping their horns, claiming that the Jews should be murdered, that the women should be raped. It did not get the crackdown it needed. On the flip side, you see, and I won't go over it again because we know what happened, but West Midlands police deciding it was far easier to just ban Israelis. And let's just remember, they weren't all Israelis. There were plenty of British citizens who were flammed of Maccabi Tel Aviv who wanted to go to that football match. But rather than protect the laws that they go to a country and they respect, the people in authority felt, well, it's far easier just to stop them. Madam Deputy Speaker, how did we get to that point? How did we get to that point where, for an easy laugh, we decided, well, the Jewish community is so small and there's lots of people who hate it, that actually it's easier just to say you can't come. It's shameful, shameful. And I'm afraid, and I did give notice that I'm going to name the member, Madam Deputy Speaker, that the Right Honourable Member for Islington North, when he led a great political party in our country, which is the Labour Party, a highly respected political party with much history, gave a safe space to anti-Semitism, gave a safe space. And I praise the Prime Minister for the action he took in driving anti-Semitism out of the Labour Party. But I look around, I look at the agitation of the councillors, of the councillor I have named. I look at the agitation of the people associating themselves with those political parties, and I say this: it is a responsibility of the leadership of the Green Party to follow the example of the Labour Party in how they addressed the creeping in of anti-Semitism into their party. I am not saying that it is the policy of the Green Party to be anti-Semitic. I'm not saying that at all. But I do feel that they must address the issue far more seriously than they have been, because I see a repeat of the years from 2015 to 2019. As I bring my comments to a close, Madam Deputy Speaker, I want to just mention about the actions of Leeds City Council. The protests that take place in Leeds are one thing, and the police give permission, and we have laws in place as to when hate speech happens, when it's broken, that people can be arrested and prosecuted. But West Yorkshire Police have made it clear to Leeds City Council that when protests want to use Leeds City Council land, that they should charge a rent for that land to be used. And the reason that West Yorkshire Police want to do that, because then an organisation is attached to what is happening. And Leeds City Council have refused to do that. They are giving permission to bodies to protest, but they are not passing on the system which is in place to charge for the use of that land. And West Yorkshire Police have said they will be able to crack down on hate speech, on violent speech, incitement to violence, if they have somebody held accountable. And that accountability on its own may temper what is happening. There was a speaker, Madam Deputy Speaker, Dr. Rihanna Ali, quite frankly, a vile individual who spoke at that rally. And she called for the targeting of the Leeds Jewish schools. That has got nothing to do with the war in Gaza. Nothing at all. School children, let alone British citizens, let alone anybody who quite frankly is not running the Israeli government, has nothing to do with the actions of the Israeli government. That is anti-Semitism as raw as it gets. But it was difficult to bring to justice because it was difficult for West Yorkshire Police to be able to prosecute directly. I believe in the end the Met Police did prosecute. And I just wanted to just finish off on the point about Sudan, about Iran, about the Russians in Ukraine. The one thing they've all got in common, Madam Deputy Speaker, is that they're not Jewish. And that shows the level of anti-Semitism in this country, that if you're dealing with a Jewish community, then let's whip up a mob, let's say what we like, let's watch authorities like West Midlands Police stand back and think it's easier to just stop the problem happening. And the road to hell is paved with alleged good intentions.
Rachel Blake. Point.
Madam Deputy Speaker, please could you advise me what course I can take when a member of this House repeatedly uses speeches to misrepresent members of the public who are not able to be present to speak for themselves?
The Honourable Lady will be aware that that is not a matter for the Chair, and she would, of course, at any point have been able to seek to intervene on the Honourable Member. Rachel Blake.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It is a privilege to speak in this important debate, and I thank my honourable friend, the member for Bury St Edmunds and Stowmarket, for opening this debate in such a powerful way. And I was struck by his early reflection of whether or not sometimes it is easy not to commemorate and not to remember. And that testimony, combined with the moving speech from my honourable friend, the member for Warrington North, in terms of the words for history and the words for remembrance. And in my remarks, I want to make the case that it is important to remember, and how we remember and the actions that that remembrance brings to us is what hopefully will matter most today. As mentioned already, the theme of this year's Holocaust Memorial Day is bridging generations. And every day, the recollection of survivors passes from memory into history. And like most honourable members here today, I have had the privilege of hearing directly from my own constituents, their own recollections and memories, and those of Holocaust survivors, about what this means to them. Passing down their experience is increasingly vital to preserve our understanding as a society of the atrocious crimes committed in the Holocaust. We must never allow ourselves to forget or minimise these horrors, and bridging the generational gap is more important than ever. A key part of this... I'll give way.
Just give me an opportunity to say, when we're talking about the events that happened, and we've spoken about the dehumanisation, Holocaust Educational Trust running visits to Auschwitz. Part of that visit at the end, they managed to display the family photographs and things like that to rehumanise people. I don't know if the Honourable Lady's been able to attend, but it is one of the most exceptionally moving things I think anybody could witness.
I thank the honourable member for recalling for us that exhibition. And I think what we've seen in Parliament over the last few weeks has been incredibly powerful. A key part of bridging that generational gap is the very youngest generation of survivors, many of whom first arrived in the UK on the Kinder transport. A memorial to this stands in my constituency in Liverpool Street Station, where many of these children met their foster families. Most of them remained in the UK, and they and their descendants are our neighbours, our families, and our friends. This week, I joined city residents and workers in the congregation at Bevis Marks Synagogue. Bevis Marks is the oldest synagogue in continuous use in Europe, and I joined them at the Holocaust Memorial Day service. Bevis Marks is a testament to London's history of tolerance, openness, and pluralism, and here I pay tribute to the work of the local community in creating the Jewish Square Mile project, which is bringing together the community and recording this long and deep history. The City of London's Jewish population dates back to the time of William the Conqueror and have long held a stake in the city's civic life. This early history, though, was a painful one. London's Jewish population were falsely accused of practices like coin clipping, and they were barred from the coronation of Richard I and subject to multiple massacres across the Middle Ages. However, moving into the 18th and 19th centuries, as pogroms swept across the continent, it was to London that hundreds of thousands of European Jews fled, many of whose descendants then hosted the refugees from the Kindertransport. The Kindertransport is a reminder not just of what Britain and its people can achieve when we work together, driven by compassion, but also that we cannot be complacent, that good intentions are enough on their own. That complacency has too often been the case when we as politicians have failed to adequately address the rise in anti-Semitism which has occurred in recent years. We have condemned and lamented hate crimes, but have we done enough to prevent them from reoccurring? We have spoken with Jewish leaders. Have we truly heard their concerns? I know that many of my Jewish constituents do not believe we have the progress that is needed. I am not the first today to mention last October's horrific attack in Manchester, but all of us will have spoken to, have heard directly from community leaders warning that something exactly like this might happen in the months leading up to it. I've spoken to young constituents who are fearful of walking to shul. Jewish people across the country are experiencing prejudicial, anti-Semitic hate. It needs to end, and we need to end it. Every member of this House has a role to play in bridging generations and in bridging communities. We are leaders in our neighbourhoods, in our villages, in our towns, and in our cities. And at a time when relations between and within communities remain so broken, our time to act is now. I ask each and every one of us, what is next? What are we doing to convene leaders of all faiths and none? What are we doing to ensure that our children are being taught about the reality of the Holocaust in school and online? What are we doing to address the hatred and violence of the past few years head on? Will we remain determined to tackle online hatred and anti-Semitism? The road to ending hatred sadly requires years of work, and those results will take longer to show than many of us would like. But it is a road of detoxification which we have gone down before, and there is a path that exists for us now. And I pay tribute to the Honourable Member for Cheadle for what he has suggested for how we proceed. It lies in the human contact, the recognition of shared values, empathy and respect that was shown to 10,000 Jewish children whose lives the British public were able to save. We must remember the Holocaust in deep reflection alone, but we must all come together to remember the extremes of good and evil which regular people are capable of. And it is by recognising that we as leaders can shape this through our own empathy, our own compassion and respect that we will stop it from happening again.
Saville Roberts.
It's an honour for me to be here today representing my constituents in Dwyfor Meirionnydd and also my party Plaid Cymru to remember firstly the 6 million Jewish children, women and men murdered in the Holocaust, and also the millions more people murdered through the Nazi persecution of other communities, which many other members have previously mentioned. And I must send my greatest congratulations to the Honourable Member for Bury St Edmunds and Stowmarket for his introduction. I thought it was excellent. And also the words of the Honourable Member for Warrington North. History is someone else's story. Memory is my story. I think these are things that we will bear in mind. And of course, reference to our history in the United Kingdom. I think it's very important that we know what has happened here when we look abroad as well. So as we commemorate the victims of the Holocaust, we remember other atrocities of genocide against the Armenians, the Holodomor in Ukraine, in Cambodia, Rwanda, Bosnia and Dwyfor. Forgive me, but this is not and cannot be an exclusive list. There have been, there are, and there will be other crimes of genocide. We cannot comfort ourselves if we presume these to be events consigned to history. The Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide is the treaty that criminalises genocide. The definition is deliberately narrow. It requires any of the following acts to have been committed with the intent to destroy, in whole or in part, a national, ethnic, racial or religious group. Here are the points. Killing members of the group, causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part, imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group, forcibly transferring children of the group to another group. We know this is happening now. We know this will happen in the future. We know that we need the international bodies and the rule-based orders to hold this to account, to define it, and as necessary to take the criminal steps as well. We know we need these because we look back and we learn from history. Within the noise and confusion of present events, we are required to call out genocidal actions wherever and by whomever they are committed. It is therefore our duty to be the watchdogs, to warn against genocide, be that in Myanmar against the Rohingya Muslims, in China against the Uyghur Muslims, or in Gaza against the people of Palestine. The International Court of Justice, as we speak, is deciding on the application of the Convention of Genocide against Myanmar. This decision will be of immense significance in relation to the question of forced displacement and the Myanmar's military attacks on the Rohingya. If the court rules that mass deportation was a motive and not a defence for genocide, this may form a precedent for a similar ruling against the Israeli government. I think it is important that this is said today. The theme for International Holocaust Memorial Day this year is Bridging Generations, a reminder that the responsibility of remembrance lives on not just through survivors, but through their descendants and through all of us. It is also a reminder of the fragile link we have with the Holocaust. A study from the Claims Conference of 2026 shows that approximately 196,000 Jewish Holocaust survivors are still with us. Their lives are a living testimony to the horrors imposed by Nazi Germany and a lesson from history to never again repeat these horrors. But they are also aging lives. The median age of Jewish Holocaust survivors is 87. By preserving this link with our past, we can ensure its retelling. That's why it's vital that we keep listening to and sharing their testimonies so that future generations can understand how distortions of truth can lead to the greatest crime of all, to genocide. The manipulation of truth is a vital component of genocide. The Nazis played on prejudice and stereotypes to scapegoat and dehumanize people they regarded as subhuman. But the Nazi regime also practiced a propaganda of deception by hiding specific details about the final solution, including press controls to prevent the public from reading statements by the Allies condemning Nazi crimes. One booklet printed in 1941 glowingly reported that in occupied Poland, German authorities had put Jewish people to work, built clean hospitals, set up soup kitchens, and been provided with newspapers and vocational training. The authority of the written word, the authority of the broadcast word, abused to manipulate the truth.
Would my honourable friend give way?
I will give way.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way, and she is giving a most powerful speech. On her point about false narratives, I wonder if she would agree with me that it is so important to distinguish between legitimate criticism of the actions of a state as compared to hatred directed towards people because of a religion. And it's worrying to have heard some remarks in a debate today, or a debate on the Holocaust of all things, that seem to blur the lines between these.
My honourable friend makes an important point, and I think that we can be sophisticated enough in our history to call out the horrors of Hamas, but at the same time to be able to address criticisms to actions which may well be found in future to comprise of genocide. We have not reached that point in law yet, but I think in this place we should be open to being able to question received narratives. And also I would share her concern that most of us here are trying to phrase the debate in the measured way it deserves. We are talking about horrific crimes against humanity in the past and possibly in the present. That needs to be talked about in a balanced way. And at the same time, of course, we are, all of us, as I said, we are horrified by the actions of Hamas. We are horrified by the attacks in Manchester last year. And these are the wider questions of how we find the balance, how we here, in our privileged position, use the language at our disposal to make sure that we are not pushing truth further and further into the undergrowth. Jan Garski was a Polish Catholic diplomat who brought eyewitness reports of the true scale of Nazi atrocities to Western leaders as early as 1942. He risked his life to alert the world to murder. Largely ignored at the time, Karski argued that the common humanity of people, not the power of governments, is the real protector of human rights. I think his memory is a challenge to all of us who speak as public leaders. If this year's theme teaches us anything, it is to be alert to those who would distort the truth for their own ends. We must listen to genocide survivors, and we must support those who would shine a light on grave injustices wherever they are. It is only through listening to testimony, through our common humanity, that we can learn from the past and secure genuine justice for victims, and stand, of course, as I said, against those actions such as that terrible attack in Manchester last year. And to close, in an increasingly troubled world where the rule-based order is threatened, we would all do well to remember that the Genocide Convention obligates state parties to pursue the enforcement of the prohibition of genocide. While the promise of never again has been ignored time and time again, we must all play our part in listening and learning from the stories of the victims of genocide. Diolch yn fawr iawn.
Jazz Athwal.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and can I thank the member for Bury St Edmunds and Stowmarket for opening this debate, and everybody else who's spoken so compassionately, with clarity, authenticity, and most of the feeling that has come out is clear for everyone to see. The Holocaust inflicted pain on a scale most of us will never truly comprehend. Pain that did not end in 1945. Pain that still echoes through families, memory, and generations of the Jewish community today. This was not history at a distance. This was cruelty by design. Mass murder, carried out deliberately on an industrial scale. And its trauma did not disappear. It was inherited. Today, Madam Deputy Speaker, I want to speak about one survivor, one voice we must listen to while we can. Her name, Susan Pollock, a Holocaust survivor who recently turned 95 and whom I had the privilege of meeting and interviewing. Susan was born in Hungary, and long before the camps, hatred crept into her life. Graffiti on walls, Jewish students barred from universities, her brother beaten at a Boy Scout meeting. Each sign carried the same message: you do not belong. Then came the order. Susan's family were forced from their home. They were told they were being resettled. She clung on to that word, resettled, for hope, because hope, even false hope, was all she had. A letter followed. All Jewish fathers were ordered to attend a meeting. Susan's father went, desperate to protect his family. He was beaten, forced into a lorry, taken away. Susan never saw him again. To this day, she does not know how or where her father died. Then came her turn. In May 1944, Susan and her family were transported by cattle trucks to Auschwitz-Birkenau. She was 15. Somebody whispered to her, "Don't say you're younger than 15." So when she was asked, she said 15 and a half. She later learned why. Children under 15 were sent with their mothers directly to the gas chambers. Susan lost her mother. And with that loss came horrors beyond language. Mothers watching their children die. Children searching for protection that could not come. Entire families murdered in minutes. This is what hatred looks like when it is given power. The cruelty did not stop. Her hair was shaved. She was inspected. Yes, inspected. Starved. Silenced. She watched people die, not by accident, but by policy. She was later sent to Bergen-Belsen. By then, she said dehumanization killed any thoughts in our heads. For an entire year, she did not speak. She once recognized somebody from her village. The next day, that woman was dead. When liberation came, Susan told me something that must never be ignored. There was no joy at being liberated. She had lost her parents, 50 members of her family, her entire community. She did not even know whether her brother was still alive. Liberation could not undo what had been destroyed. This was Susan's experience, and it was the experience of 6 million Jewish people and millions of others systematically murdered because hatred was allowed to rule. Madam Deputy Speaker, the Holocaust did not begin with the gas chambers. It began with words, with lies repeated until they sounded like the truth, with people labelled as other, with hatred normalised, silence excused. That's why remembrance alone is not enough. Because never again is not a slogan, it's a test of whether we challenge anti-Semitism when we see it. We challenge it when it's inconvenient, a test of whether we confront fascist rhetoric when it masquerades as opinion, a test of whether we defend human dignity when it costs us something. 6 million Jews were murdered, not because the world did not know, but because too many looked away. Susan Pollock survived Auschwitz. She survived Bergen-Belsen. She survived an attempt to erase her humanity. But survival alone was not justice, and silence was never safety. So the lesson of the Holocaust is clear. When hatred is tolerated, it grows. When lies go unchallenged, they spread. When humanity is divided into us and them, violence is never far away. That is why this House must be unequivocal. We will not excuse anti-Semitism. We will not tolerate fascism. We will not stand by while people are dehumanized in our politics, our communities, in our public life. Because remembrance demands resolve. Resolve to speak when others stay silent. Resolve to act when others hesitate. Resolve to defend our shared humanity every time it is threatened. We owe that to Susan Pollock. We owe it to the 6 million. We owe it to the future. If never again is to mean anything at all, it must mean now, and it must mean us. Thank you.
Martin Vickers.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's a pleasure to take part in this debate once again. And there have been some profound, passionate and emotional and informative contributions, as is so often the case when we put our political exchanges to one side. As members have already mentioned, this year's Holocaust Memorial Day theme is Bridging the Generations. Every year we move further away from the horrific events of the Holocaust, it becomes even more distant, and every year more of our Holocaust survivors pass away. I understand that the median age of Holocaust survivors globally is 87. It is becoming harder and harder for these few remaining survivors to share their testimonies in person. Nothing compares to the raw shock of hearing the horrors of the Holocaust spoken from the mouth of someone who actually experienced it. When those voices pass away, who will pick up the mantle? That is why this year's theme is so important. We have to bridge the gap between the generations. We must begin the process of passing on the responsibility of remembrance from survivors onto the next generations. Sadly, we haven't, as a global society, learned the lessons, and we know of many examples of genocide since the Holocaust. Last year I spoke in this debate ahead of the 30th anniversary of the Srebrenica genocide, which the Honourable Member for Rochdale has previously mentioned, and apologies if I refer to some of the same points again. I've taken a particular interest in the Western Balkans, as when I studied for my politics degree, one of the units was the breakup of Yugoslavia. And when I arrived here in Westminster, I became involved in the various all-party groups that focus on the region and subsequently served as the Prime Minister's trade envoy to the Western Balkans. The Srebrenica genocide took place in July 1995 during the Bosnian War, and as has been said, 8,372 Bosniak Muslim men and boys were murdered, and it is legally recognised as the first genocide on European soil since World War II. It was a campaign of war crimes, ethnic cleansing and genocide against the non-Serb population. The war cost over 100,000 people their lives and the displacement of more than 2 million men, women and children. Like others, I had the privilege of meeting some of the mothers of Srebrenica. They are a group that represent the mothers, wives, daughters and families of those who perished. They do magnificent work in keeping the world focused on the terrible events of July 1995. Today, as we look back on 3 decades since that darkness fell over Bosnia, we can ask the same question about the Srebrenica genocide. When the voices that speak on this genocide finally fall silent, who will speak for them? Sadly, as with our Holocaust survivors in the coming years and decades, the direct testimonies of Srebrenica survivors will become merely written testimonies. I've previously spoken in the Chamber about my visits to Srebrenica, and just as a visit to military cemeteries in Belgium, France, or indeed to a country churchyard where you see a handful of graves maintained by the Commonwealth Graves Commission, it hits home of the sacrifice of so many, and such is the case in Srebrenica. Any number of locations where the tombstones stretch row on row as it stirs the emotions, as does the harrowing sight and the silence of Potochatri Battery Factory. I will refer to Potochatri again in a moment, and I give way.
Very grateful to Honourable Friend, and I think he just made a very important point about the gravestones being seen with the massacres that had taken place in Bosnia and other areas. Does that not emphasise why it is so important of Holocaust Memorial Day, of the work of the Holocaust Educational Trust? Because, of course, millions of people were cremated so that there wasn't any evidence of the genocide that took place.
Yes. I thank my right honourable friend for that intervention, and of course I entirely agree with the point he was making. Srebrenica is located in Republika Srpska, a semi-autonomous region of the Bosnia-Herzegovina, controlled by Bosnian Serbs as a part of the Dayton Peace Agreement. Many perpetrators are still at large, and genocide denial is widespread among some groups of Bosnian Serbs. Had it not been for the involvement of the international community, the memorial may never have come into being at all. The decision to locate the Srebrenica Potocari Memorial Cemetery, as it is known today, and secure its funding was made by the UN High Representative. Much of the funding came from foreign countries. The village of Pottichari was chosen by survivors and bereaved relatives because it was where many of them last saw their loved ones. The Srebrenica Pottichari Memorial Complex was subsequently established in May 2001, and it began as a cemetery, and the site was officially opened by former President Clinton on Saturday, 20th of September 2003. The lesson that we learned from Srebrenica is that hatred and intolerance can flourish if left unchallenged. In Bosnia, people of many faiths lived as neighbours for generations, and yet in a short time those neighbours were viewed as not just the enemy, but an enemy that was so threatening that they must be ethnically cleansed. Not only were 8,372 men and boys massacred, but thousands, some estimates are as high as 50,000, women and girls who suffered from sexual violence. Thousands of women and children were forcibly deported. The children born in today, Srebrenica is as much a historical event as the Holocaust was to my generation. And that's the worry. There is danger that distant that leads to detachment, and detachment can allow the seeds of division to grow once more. This leads me to my next point. Addressing the issue of genocide denial, sadly we see a rising tide of genocide denial across the Western Balkans today. To bridge generations, we must arm our young people with the truth. We cannot allow the history of 8,372 murdered men and boys to be debated into a non-existence by those who seek to revive the same nationalist hatreds that led to those murders in the first place. We must ensure that our schools don't just teach the dates of the Bosnian War and the genocide in Srebrenica, but the mechanics of it. How does the slow drip of dehumanising rhetoric turn a neighbour you have lived alongside for many years to become an enemy and one you are willing to destroy? For it is young people that we must reach. It is for them that the lessons of Srebrenica, the Holocaust and subsequent genocides are most important. They are our future, and it is they who we will rely on to avoid the mistakes of the past. We are living in an increasingly dangerous world, a world where human decency is sometimes in short supply, a world which is forgetting the lessons of the recent past. Let us state today that the story of Srebrenica, the Holocaust and other genocides will not fade into the archives, that we will never forget how stripping people of their humanity can lead to some of the worst crimes in humanist history. As is often the case, our forefathers who wrote the various religious texts of the many faiths that are represented here and throughout our country. The service of Compline in the Book of Common Prayer says, "We must be vigilant, because our adversary the devil, as a roaring lion, walketh about seeking whom we may devour." Vivid language, I agree, but these are stark words, and sadly the devil can enter the hearts of people, especially when propaganda and evil leadership are involved. We must never forget the brutality of which man is capable, and it is right that we use parliamentary time to commemorate these horrific events. To the young people watching this debate today or taking part in Holocaust education events in their schools or communities, I say, pick up the mantle. Don't let these testimonies fade away and be forgotten. Bridge the gap between the generations and carry the lessons of the Holocaust forward. I know from the experience of my daughter who, when she was in her late 20s, went on a social project to Rwanda. And there she met some of those who had survived the genocide there. And it had an enormous emotional impact on her. And that's why I say it's particularly important that the young people are involved. I attended a Holocaust memorial event in my constituents in the town of Brigg last Sunday, and one of the highlights really was the fact that one of the local schools was involved and pupils read some of the lessons at the short service. We rely on our young people to succeed where past generations have failed.
Melanie Ward.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and it's a pleasure to follow the Honourable Member for Brigg and Immingham, as it so often is on topics like this. He speaks with great authority. I rise once again this year to remember the Holocaust, one of the darkest chapters in human history. The industrial-scale extermination of 6 million Jewish people and millions more prisoners of war, political prisoners, Poles, disabled people, members of the LGBT community, Roma and others, is a horror so bleak that we must ensure the memory of what was done and those whose lives were taken never fades. The theme, as has been mentioned, for this year's Holocaust Memorial Day is that of bridging generations. In last year's debate, we marked the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz-Birkenau. Like a number of other honourable members, I shared some of my own family's story and spoke about my Jewish great-grandfather. In the intervening year, we've lost more Holocaust survivors who were determined to let the world know what happened to them, their friends and family, in that horrific place. Holocaust education is not just teaching history. It should play a crucial role in combating anti-Semitism and hatred and preventing future genocides. As we are able to hear from fewer and fewer survivors each year, it becomes an additional duty on all of us to educate future generations on the atrocities that were committed on European soil. In my constituency in December, just last month, a group of young masked men were photographed giving the Nazi salute and brandishing the symbol of the SS on the steps of our townhouse in Kirkcaldy. It was so shocking that at first I thought the image must have been generated by AI, because things like that don't usually happen round our way. But local police confirmed that it was real. It was honestly frightening that those men felt comfortable participating in such an act in broad daylight, not 400 yards from our Holocaust Memorial or the War Memorial, which commemorates the hundreds of Kirkcaldy men who died fighting the Nazis. Acts like this are a warning to us all. Hatred spreads in plain sight. There are those amongst us, including those who sit in this place, whose purpose is to sow and stir hatred and division in our communities. It is fostered and spread online in the presence of vulnerable young minds. This is an eradication of historical record and memory in favour of misinformation. I am grateful to my local police force in Kirkcaldy for their swift action in identifying, arresting and charging suspects, as well as to the many Fifers who expressed their outrage that such an ignorant, offensive and dangerous act had taken place in our midst. I have said to my constituents that in the months and years ahead, sadly, we and they must all be prepared to take a visible stand against hate. Some of the people in that photograph were not men, but boys, who told the police that they had not understood what the gesture of the Nazi salute meant, nor understood the SS symbol on the flag that they held. But this, Madam Deputy Speaker, is why the theme of bridging generations is so crucial. As the Honourable Member for Harrow East said earlier, education and memory must become responsibility. And my honourable friend, the Member for Warrington North, in a deeply profound speech, spoke about the difference between history and memory. We in Kirkcaldy are proud of our Holocaust Memorial, designed by students from 3 Fife schools who visited Auschwitz-Birkenau in 2005. The sculpture is in the shape of a doorway and has symbols carved into it that were used across Europe and America in the 1930s, telling others that this is a safe place. The UK and towns like mine in Fife have long been a safe place for minorities and those fleeing persecution. It is incumbent on us, on all of us, to call out racism and anti-Semitism and those who seek to divide us. I know that the vast majority of my constituents, indeed of our country, agrees with this, but we can take nothing for granted in today's uncertain world. As my honourable friend, the Member for Bury St Edmunds and Stowmarket so eloquently said, we cannot assume that it will not happen again. Indeed, in the wake of the anti-Semitic attacks on Heaton Park Synagogue and Bondi Beach, we must be clear-eyed about what is happening. In the aftermath of the Holocaust and World War II, international law and the rules-based order were created to put lines in the sand about right and wrong and to learn the lessons of what had taken place. And so now, as the rules-based order is increasingly trampled on by nations who should know better, we, the UK, must do more to prevent mass atrocities. There must be better prediction, prevention and response to mass identity-based violence. Data suggests that since 2012, there has been an increase in the number of countries where mass atrocity crimes are occurring, and action is needed to stop this. There is a gap in global leadership on this agenda, and it shows. The UK has never had a strategy for the prevention of mass atrocity crimes. Given the state of global affairs, surely now we need one more than ever. Surely, too, we should now seek to build a coalition with like-minded countries to monitor the warning signs and act together to prevent the mass murder of citizens who are targeted simply because of who they are. I ask the Minister to take this away. In the aftermath of the Holocaust, humanity was determined to prevent genocide, mass atrocities and identity-based violence from taking place ever again. But the warning light is flashing red, and it is time for renewed domestic and international action alongside education. Holocaust Memorial Day is often marked by the lighting of a candle. It is up now to us to light that candle and carry the memory of those who perished with us always.
Yeah. Kirsty Blackman.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's an honour to represent the SNP in today's debate on the Holocaust Memorial Day. 6 million Jews were murdered. I was trying to think about the words to use to describe it, and tragedy was one of the first things I thought, but then a tragedy is something that's unavoidable. A tragedy is, in my head anyway, it's something that was going to happen anyway. This was evil perpetrated by humans. I think the member from Brigg and Immingham talked about the brutality of which man is capable, and I think that really was the phrase that has stuck with me from the debate today. It is about the brutality of which human beings are capable of inflicting on one another. The member for Harrow East talked about othering, and that ability that human beings have to begin to other humans because of some perceived difference, because of a grouping together of them, is horrific, and it's something that we should all be aware of and think of when we're talking about the lessons of the Holocaust, when we're talking about learning from what happened in Nazi Germany. The member for Cheadle talked about what happened. A number of other members have also talked about what didn't happen. And what didn't happen was there wasn't every single person in Nazi Germany was a Nazi, was responsible for taking Jewish people to the camps. But there was enough people in Nazi Germany who were willing to turn a blind eye to that. And I'm not blaming individuals for their action. Maybe their family was being threatened. Maybe they were terrified. Maybe they had circumstances in which we can't contemplate today. But for every one of us who has moments where we don't stand up against hatred, where we don't stand up against othering, we need to think about what the reasons are that we are not standing up. We need to think about whether we can, whether we're members of Parliament, whether we're members of the public, whether we're community leaders or faith leaders. We need to think about whether we would be able to sleep at night if people were looking back in history at our actions and considering us to be bystanders rather than people who took action when that action was needed, when that othering was happening. We have every human being has value. People's value is not based on their religion or their country of birth or the colour of their skin or which town they currently live in or how much money they make or what job they do. Every human being inherently has value, and every single one of us has got a responsibility to ensure, as representatives, that no matter the differences that there are between any of us, that we recognise and stand up for the value of every one of our constituents, of every one of the people across these islands. We've got that responsibility. We've got that responsibility to stand up to anyone, whether they're a politician and a member of this place, whether they're a politician at a different level, whether they're a member of the public. We've got those responsibilities to say to them, no, someone is not less because you've put them in a box, because you've suggested they are somehow other. They have just as much value as you do. It does not matter what country they were born in. It doesn't matter who they worship. It doesn't matter what religious text is sitting on their bedside table. We all have value just because we are human beings. And we've all got that responsibility. And I want every one of us, whether we're in here or whether we're out there, to be able to sleep at night because we know that we've done the right thing, because we know that we've stood up against that drip, drip, drip of that beginnings of hatred that can culminate in where we ended up with the Holocaust. I find it very difficult to comprehend how you can go from, being slightly negative about somebody, about a group, to the mass industrial murder that we saw, because I'm not in that situation. I find it very difficult to contemplate how that can happen, but we know that it did. We know that it has. We know that it's happened not just in Nazi Germany, but in Srebrenica and Dwyfor. We know that this has happened, and I think the speech that was made by the member for Kirkcaldy and Cowdenbeath, I can't remember the full constituency name, talking about the point of the international rules-based order and the reason that was set up. None of this stuff, none of these international organisations that we've relied on and listened to were set up as simply trading organisations. The Genocide Convention was there because we needed to ensure, every one of us, every country needed to ensure that we had learned from those those lessons, and that we were resolved together never to do it again. That's why some of the comments. 2 seconds. I will. Some of the comments that are being made about those international organisations, about, well, we can step away from that trading organisation, is a bit misinformed, because actually it's not just about that. It's about ensuring that we are working together to prevent genocide, that we're working together as countries where we can not police one another, but where we can assist one another to ensure that every country sees the value of every human, and that we never, ever other people like that again.
First of all, can I commend the Honourable Lady for her speech and contribution. One of the ways of starting to address the issue is at schools and at an educational level. And some of the school teachers, history teachers back home, tell me they struggled to include Holocaust in the curriculum for history. Now, if you're a politics student, you can come to Parliament here and you can learn a little bit here, and then you can take that back to your schools. Does the Honourable Lady feel, when it comes to starting early, and I think of my son and his friends from his Glasgow College back home, they went to Auschwitz as a child, and their attitude and life changed dramatically. Does the Honourable Lady think of me, when it comes to addressing these issues, helping educationally, that funding trips to Auschwitz would be a way of doing that?
I absolutely agree, and I know that there's a number of schools in Scotland that take part in trips that go to Auschwitz as well. I think it is really important that continues, particularly with this theme of bridging the generations. As we are having fewer and fewer individuals who can talk about their experiences, I think it's incredibly important that we remember that history, we remember that this was a real thing that happened. There's too much Holocaust denial of all sorts. We need to be showing people so that they can tackle that dis and misinformation by the evidence of their own eyes.
Alec,
for her excellent speech. This Sunday I went to our Holocaust Memorial Day in Leeds and met my former constituent when I was a councillor, Trudy Silman, 97 years old now. We have less and less of these Holocaust survivors. So I'd like to pay tribute to the second generation of the children of Holocaust survivors, including my own father, who gave oral testimony to the Holocaust Centre North, which hopefully by next Holocaust Memorial Day we transcribe and be available to the public, so that not just me and my children understand our family's history, but everybody can learn from that and understand our link in the UK to the Holocaust, and it can echo through the generations.
I thank the honourable member, and I hope that we do see that testimony more widely shared. I think, do you know, I have a conflicting thought about it is really important that we hear testimony and that we listen to testimony and that we amplify that testimony, but also forcing people who maybe don't necessarily want to relive that trauma to continually relive that trauma in order for us to learn is not always the best way forward. So I think that balance between how we can educate people without re-traumatising survivors in a way that we can ensure that as many, particularly young people, but also, you know, the number of people that I'm having that contact me who are expressing deeply wrong views, who are not necessarily teenagers, who are older adults in some cases, who are othering in their minds, who are talking about ethnic or religious groups and putting them in some sort of box. That dis and misinformation is not just about young people, it's about every generation. So the more that we can do to spread that. I don't want to take up too much more time of the House, but I just want to thank everybody who does stand up, whether, again, you're in this place or whether you're not in this place. If you are taking that moment to tackle and challenge those false narratives, if you are willing to say, this is wrong, it is wrong to dehumanise people, it is wrong to put people in a box based on their religious convictions or their sexuality or the colour of their skin. Anyone who is willing to do that in any circumstances, that is appreciated. It's not easy to do, but we all need to do it because none of us want to end up in a situation where we are bystanders as atrocities are committed. So thank you to everybody who does stand up, and thank you to all of those people at the Holocaust Educational Trust and the Holocaust Memorial Day for bringing the information to us so that we can make speeches on this, so that we can talk to our constituents about this, and so that we can do our best to listen and challenge those horrific, untrue narratives.
Joni Reid.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and thank you to my honourable friend, the member for Bury St Edmunds and Stowmarket, for not just his opening remarks, but the commitment that he has to this cause, both in this House and outside of it. Madam Deputy Speaker, the Holocaust was a unique event in human history, where a state waged external war with expressly genocidal aims, combined with the industrialisation of killing of a transcontinental enterprise. The Holocaust matters to us today because we owe it to the dead and the living who went through that horror to commemorate their suffering, because we should pay tribute to those still with us as well as those who have gone before us, and to those who served to ensure the Hitler regime, whose raison d'etre was the mass murder of Jews and others it saw as less human. But perhaps most importantly, because we owe it to ourselves to remind each other where the poison of racist hatred and humanity takes us. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, it matters more this year because undoubtedly there has been an appalling rise in anti-Semitic violence and public and private abuse of Jews. If the Holocaust teaches us anything, it is to stand up and call out hatred and racism. And there is now barely hidden campaign to drive Jews out of public and civic life in Britain. A campaign which I'm sad to say members of this House are active participants or complicit in. The eruption of anti-Semitism in Britain since the 7th of October 2013 has underlined how supposed progressives and anti-racists are fine to speak out unless it's about hatred of Jews. Campaigners have marched alongside open supporters of fascistic Hamas. They have shouted slogans advocating a global war against Jews. And they have done all of this because they believe, maybe, that their newfound allies are merely anti-Zionist and not actually anti-Semites at all. The arguments that dominate today's anti-Semitic discourse are superficially more sophisticated and are increasingly shaped by the melting pool of extreme ideas that is provided by social media. But the reality is that the far right, the far left and the Islamists are still relying on the old tropes of hidden Jewish power and manipulation, Jewish bloodlust and Jews as the killer of Christ. And it is just now they hide this behind the words of Zionism or Israel and hope people won't spot the difference. Social media has seen many of these ideas seep into the discourse of what is supposedly mainstream. In 2019, the Right Honourable Member for Fareham and Waterlooville told the Bruges Group of that supposed threat of cultural Marxism, an idea which has direct Nazi roots and a phrase which the former MP Andrew Percy warned others against using. In 2024, Liz Truss was forced to remove a bogus and anti-Semitic quote attributed to Mayor Rothschild from her memoirs. And then there is the case of Reform's recently announced candidate for Gorton and Denton, who, like the Right Honourable Member for Islington North, appears not to believe that ethnic minority children born here can ever be British or indeed understand British humour. This is the baseline argument of the anti-Semites, the otherness of Jews, retooled for the use of today's insurgent far right and far left. Madam Deputy Speaker, it is beholden on all of us to call out these issues in our midst, and there has been too much silence in this regard. There are members of this House who've been involved in stoking the fires of Islamist hatred, anti-Semitism and Holocaust inversion. And perhaps some, like last year, will make very fine speeches about Holocaust memorial, but we should not allow ourselves to be fooled. One member of this House writing about the Middle East on social media wrote invoking images of the gas chambers, a barbaric creation used for the industrialised systematic murder of Jewish men, women and children, and it trivialises the Holocaust. But it's not just Holocaust inversion. We have outright anti-Semitic tropes. We've had on social media members of this House share posts, images of political leaders being dog-walked or controlled by Israeli politicians or by the Zionist lobby. And this draws on stereotypes of Jewish power and control and alludes to some kind of malign Jewish influence. These are classic anti-Semitic tropes and have existed for thousands of years, but are continually being repackaged and updated to fit the contemporary political context. On Budget Day, the Honourable Member for Coventry South talked about her constituents being bleeding dry because of our government's support of Israel. And we also heard a member of this House talk about Israel's block.
Just for a moment, I just want to make sure that protocol has been addressed. When, first of all, we obviously don't mention members by their name, not that she's done that, but she's mentioned 2 constituencies to date. Can I have assurances that she's let those members know that she'll be referencing their constituencies in the chamber for this debate?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I can confirm that I have written to all members who were included in my speech. And another member talked about Israel's blood-soaked tentacles. There is no safe limit of anti-Semitism that we should tolerate, and no requirement for us to apply weaker moral tests on what is an acceptable opinion because of religious heritage or our interculture. Human rights apply universally to all humans, and so do human responsibilities. We need to enforce those responsibilities before it is too late. The warning lights are already flashing. We don't have to look back to the 1930s to see how democracies can crash under the burden to political extremism and contempt for the rule of law, because we see it in the news every day.
We now come to the front benches, and I come to the Liberal Democrat spokesperson, Danny Chambers.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It is an honour to speak in this debate today and to follow such passionate speeches, including the one just given by the member for East Kilbride. And I'd like to congratulate my friend from Bury St Edmunds for not only such an eloquent introduction to this debate, but for such an interesting history of persecution of Jews in Britain for the best part of 1,000 years. And I thought that was very, very informative, but also provided much needed context to the discussion we're having today. And the many members who spoke about individuals and charities and organisations who are working tirelessly to ensure that that the nation and school children in particular are educated about the Holocaust and will not forget it. And with the average age of Holocaust survivors being 87 years old, it is very prescient that the Holocaust Memorial Day theme is bridging generations. And Madam Deputy Speaker, the Holocaust Memorial Day Trust plays a vital role in ensuring that remembrance is not limited to those families who were murdered those whose families were murdered in the Holocaust, but also includes those who, having been mercilessly killed by the Nazis, were left with no one to speak their names. For the victims with no surviving family or relatives, their legacy must be safeguarded through education, remembrance, and memorial. If the words "never again" are to mean anything, they must represent a shared commitment to challenge hatred wherever it appears. And sadly, this year, the Holocaust Memorial Day comes against the backdrop of anti-Semitism on the rise. Madam Deputy Speaker, Jewish people in the UK are facing unacceptable and rising levels of hatred and violence. And I know from speaking to my own constituents in Winchester, I've heard just how isolating and just how frightening this can be. Because no one should feel anxious or scared when going to their place of worship. And no one should be denied the freedom of their expression of their religious beliefs. And it ought to be a national shame that we need security measures outside places of worship. But the murder of 2 members of the Jewish community just last year outside their synagogue, we know that these measures are unfortunately necessary. For so many British Jews, Holocaust Memorial Day is deeply personal. It's a day of grief and of remembrance and of resilience. Madam Deputy Speaker, to end, I'll quote the words of Prunai Levi. The story of the death camps should be understood by everyone as a sinister alarm signal. And Madam Deputy Speaker, while hatred and division persists, this alarm signal must be in our minds today, and it must remain in our minds for generations to come. Madam Deputy Speaker, on my way to the Chamber today to give this speech, I walked past the very moving exhibition in Parliament, where we can see the replicas of the shoes of people who were killed in those death camps. And some of those shoes are of little children. And this is a stark and haunting reminder of what the Holocaust required. The Holocaust depended on the systematic dehumanization of its victims, casting human beings as non-human, and that is in order to justify the unjustifiable. To murder millions, the Nazi state had to treat even little children not as actual children of names and families and futures, but as something less than human. So in this chamber and in our communities, in our schools, in our neighbourhoods, let us all stand with Jewish communities, because anti-Semitism has no place in our country, has no place abroad, and we must do all we can to ensure Jewish people can practice their faith freely, live openly, and participate fully in our society without fear. Madam Deputy Speaker, we remain today and will always remain committed to creating a society that never stops learning from the lessons of history.
I call the Shadow Minister, Paul Holmes.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker, and it is a genuine pleasure to speak in this debate as Shadow Communities Minister, in a debate where members from all sides of this House have been frank, honest, open and emotional. And I think that debates like this about our history, but also about our futures, often bring the best out of members in our House today. And I stay and pay tribute to all members in their speeches this afternoon. Particularly, can I pay tribute to the member who opened this debate, the member for Bury St Edmunds. I don't think I'm alone in saying that he is one of the most gentlemanly and honourable members of this House when he conducts his business, and he gave us some beautiful words that I think we all must learn from, as well as a wonderful history tour, but also a history tour that shows that his speech has brought our history closer to home. And that intrinsically this country was involved in. And I think that his honesty in that is admirable. Can I also say that despite the serious nature of this debate, I do believe that the honourable gentleman should consider audiobooks, because I think that his dulcet tones should be going out far and wide across this country, which are incredibly soothing, may I say to him. But he has done a tremendous job today, and I pay tribute to him. My honourable friend, the member for Harrow East, reminds us that the Holocaust isn't just the start of anti-Semitism or the end of anti-Semitism, but a reminder of the need to remember not just of what's happened, but what's happening in this country and in the world going forward. And his speech was a stark reminder of that. My right honourable friend, the member for Wetherby and Easingwold, spoke in graphic detail, and he was right to do so. Having been to Auschwitz and to the Holocaust Museum in Jerusalem only last month, we mustn't become dehumanised to our history. And his graphic speech this afternoon reminded us of the horrors of the past. He did outline some local issues to do with Leeds councillors and Leeds councillors. He has every right to do so on the floor of this House. It is a shame that any leadership of any party, political party, didn't feel the need to vet people properly, but also haven't felt the need to act on something that I think is incredibly serious. I would remind the House and him that Hamas is a prescribed organisation, and I hope that the police took the action or will take the action following what he's mentioned in this House to bring that person to justice. I do think he is absolutely right that we need to call out anti-Semitism and challenge those who look the other way, not by just making points of orders, but actually making substantive contributions in this chamber, as he has done this afternoon. And my honourable friend, the member for Brigg and Immingham, mentioned that we must arm young people with knowledge about genocide, despite the dehumanisation and nationalism that we've seen in the parts of the world that he mentioned in his speech. He is absolutely right. And they are just a short peppering of the excellent contributions that we've had from across the House today. Madam Deputy Speaker, on Holocaust Memorial Day, this moment invites us to pause, to reflect and to recommit ourselves to ensuring that the darkest chapter in human history is never forgotten. This year's theme, Bridging Generations, is a powerful reminder that the responsibility of remembrance does not end with the survivors. It lives on through their children, their grandchildren, and through every single one of us. And as a nation, we must never allow the history of the Holocaust to fade from our collective consciousness. As the events of the 1930s and 40s move further from living memory, our duty becomes even more urgent. We must ensure that future generations know and understand the horrors, the traumas and the lessons of the Shoah. For remembrance is not a passive act. It is a conscious commitment to education and to the memory of those killed in barbarous cruelty. Holocaust Memorial Day plays a vital role in sustaining that commitment. On this day, we commemorate the genocide of 6 million Jews, men, women and children murdered by Nazi Germany and its collaborators. We also remember the millions of others persecuted and killed, Roma and Sinti people, the disabled, gay men, political opponents, and countless others targeted by a regime built on hatred and dehumanisation. The focus on bridging generations reminds us of our collective role in ensuring that the Holocaust remains a lesson for all those in positions of influence and responsibility. We, in this place, have a special obligation to ensure that the stories of those who came before us continue to be told accurately, compassionately, and courageously to future generations. And as we reflect, we must also remember that the Holocaust was not the final genocide of the 20th century. The world has witnessed unspeakable brutality again and again. And we all in this House send our thoughts to those affected by anti-Semitic terror, particularly those in Australia, as many members across the House mentioned. The Holocaust Memorial Day Trust reminds us that commemorating these tragedies is not only a moral duty or a hope, that through memory we can build the vigilance needed to prevent these horrors from recurring. Yet remembrance alone is not enough. We must also confront the reality of anti-Semitism today. Any discrimination or intimidation based on religion or race is deplorable and must never be tolerated. In 2016, the United Kingdom became the first country in Europe to formally adopt the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition of anti-Semitism, an important step, but one that we must build on with action against the rising tide of anti-Semitism. Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm afraid to say that data from the Community Security Trust show deeply troubling trends. In the first half of 2025 alone, 1,521 anti-Semitic incidents were recorded across the UK, the second highest total ever reported for this period. The surge in anti-Semitism that followed the horrific terrorist attacks of 7th of October, before any major military response in Gaza had taken place, is a stark reminder anti-Semitism remains a persistent, poisonous force. In this context, initiatives to strengthen Holocaust education and public memory are more important than ever. That is why the Holocaust Memorial Act 2026, which received royal assent just last week, marks a historic and meaningful milestone. It will finally bring to life the vision announced in 2015 by Lord Cameron, a National Holocaust Memorial and Learning Centre beside Parliament in Victoria Tower Gardens. This will serve as a lasting tribute to the 6 million Jewish victims and to all victims of Nazi persecution, and it will stand as an enduring educational resource, a totemic reminder of the consequences of unchecked hatred and the vital importance of resisting it. And yet, at the very moment when education is most urgently needed, we face a worrying decline. As the Honourable Gentleman mentioned, in 2023, more than 2,000 secondary schools across the United Kingdom took part in Holocaust Memorial Day commemorations, numbers that had grown each year since 2019. But in the wake of the October 7th attacks, participation fell to under 1,200 in 2024 and just 854 in 2025, a drop of nearly 60%. This is alarming, to say the least. Holocaust education should never be seen as political, nor should it be treated as contingent on current world events. The Chief Rabbi expressed this with clarity and moral force when he said, "Holocaust Memorial Day is not a platform for political debate. It is not an endorsement of any government, perspective or conflict. It is an act of human memory. To insist that it must justify itself by reference to today's headlines is to fundamentally misunderstand it." He also reminded us of another essential point. The Shoah was not inevitable. It was the end of a paved road with normalised scapegoating, constant disinformation, violent autocracy, and a culture of the most extreme hatred. It began not in concentration camps, but in classrooms, newspapers, and public squares where people learned to look away. Holocaust education, then, is not a parochial concern, and it is right that by law children are taught about the Holocaust as part of the Key Stage 3 history curriculum. And I welcome that the government has made a commitment that the Holocaust will remain a compulsory topic in the reformed national curriculum, which will also be required teaching in academy schools when it is implemented. It is only through this education that we can honour those who were killed. And to reference the Chief Rabbi once more, Honouring Jewish victims of genocide does not diminish compassion for any other people. On the contrary, it enlarges it because collective memory is not a finite resource. Finally, Madam Deputy Speaker, today, as we work to bridge generations, connecting the testimonies of survivors to the responsibilities of our children and grandchildren, let us ensure that the horrors of the Holocaust are never forgotten and, most importantly, never repeated. So let us, across all generations, across all parties and across both sides of this chamber, stand together in remembrance, but also united in hope.
I call the Minister, Minister Miata Fambulla.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. May I start by thanking the member for Bury St Edmunds and Stowmarket for opening this debate with such a poignant and thoughtful contribution. He set the tone of the debate impeccably. I think this debate has shown powerfully and painfully that the past few years have not been easy for British Jews, nor for Jewish communities across the world. Many colleagues have spoken today with a frankness and an empathy that reflects the deep sense of concern felt across the House. Britain is rightly proud of being one of the most successful multi-faith and multi-ethnic democracies. It is part of who we are. And so it's with a particular heavy heart that we recall the attack on Heaton Park Synagogue in Manchester on Yom Kippur, one of the holiest days in the Jewish calendar, and the shocking attack at Bondi Beach in Sydney. These events remind us that anti-Semitism is never a problem for someone else to solve. It is a threat for all of us, to our values, our cohesion, and our shared sense of safety. But today's debate is not only about confronting rising anti-Semitism. It is first and foremost about honouring the 6 million Jewish men, women and children murdered in the Holocaust, and the thousands of Roma and Sinti, disabled people, Jehovah's Witnesses, gay men and political opponents who were also persecuted and killed. And it is about remembering the genocides that tragically have happened in more recent times. More than 80 years have passed since the liberation of Auschwitz and Birkenau, yet the lessons of where hatred, dehumanization and violent bigotry can lead remain painfully relevant today. Many of us in this House have had the immense privilege of hearing directly from Holocaust survivors. This year's Holocaust Memorial Day theme, Bridging Generations, feels especially poignant. The survivors who have carried the heaviest of burdens, sharing their testimonies with extraordinary courage, are fewer each year. We owe it to them to ensure their voices never fade. The member of Warrington North spoke incredibly powerfully of the memories, the stories of this dark period, the profound impact they have, and how sharing this is more important today than it has ever been. And thank you to the member of Ilford South for sharing the heart-wrenching story of Susan Pollock, which is a harrowing, an absolutely harrowing reminder of where hate and othering can lead us. Over the past 2 weeks, colleagues will have walked through the atrium at Portcullis House and seen the extraordinary exhibition of ceramic shoes in their footsteps. The exhibition is a quiet but powerful reminder that trauma and memory echo across generations, and that remembrance is not passive, it is active, it is creative, and it is deeply personal. The exhibition also pays tribute to Danny Herman. Danny and his family arrived in the UK on the eve of the Second World War, eventually settling in Liverpool, becoming British citizens and contributing to this country in ways large and small, from wartime industry to professional sport. In the atrium, the shoes created by his family speak of love, survival and legacy. They remind us that every survivor's story is unique and everyone deserves to be remembered. The message today is clear. We cannot remember the victims of the Holocaust whilst ignoring anti-Semitism in our own time. Yet, despite the words never again, we continue to see violent conflict across the world and civilians caught in its path. It underscores the urgency of the work we are discussing today. As the member of Rochdale set out so effectively, we all know that social media can be an extraordinary force for connection, but it can also be a vehicle for spreading Holocaust denial, hatred and division faster than ever before. This is why we must remain vigilant and why safeguarding our children is so essential, not only to protect them, but to equip them with the critical skills and confidence they need to challenge hatred when they encounter it. The Department for Education launched the Tackling Anti-Semitism Innovation Fund on Holocaust Memorial Day. The fund aims to address misinformation, improve media literacy, and encourage tolerant, informed debate. 7 million has already been allocated tackling anti-Semitism in our schools, our colleges, our universities, including 500,000 for the University Jewish Chaplaincy and further funding for the Union of Jewish Students and Palace Yard to train staff to recognise and address anti-Semitism. Many members have spoken today about the importance of testimony. The Prime Minister has made a clear pledge that every student in this country should have the opportunity to hear recorded survivor testimony. Testimony 360, a free digital education programme from the Holocaust Education Trust using virtual reality and digital eyewitness accounts, will help deliver that promise and ensure survivors' voices remain accessible long after they can no longer speak in person. This government continues to support high-quality Holocaust education through UCL's Centre for Holocaust Education and through the Holocaust Education Trust Lessons from Auschwitz programme. These programmes have transformed understanding for thousands of students and teachers and will continue to do so. This education is vital, and this is important now more than ever, as members of the House have said. The member for Cowdenbeath and Kirkcaldy provided a powerful testimony of the rising tide of hate and division we are seeing both at home and abroad. She is right to demand that we must be vigilant and that we must do better. I will take away her call to put in place a strategy to prevent the mass murder of innocent people simply because of their faith, their race, their ethnicity, or their identity. And the member of cities of London and Westminster was also right to remind us that we all have a responsibility to tackle the anti-Semitism, the rise of hate, the rise of division we are seeing in our communities, and that we must use our own empathy, our compassion, our respect to bridge and to hold our communities together. And I echo the words of the member of Aberdeen North, that we must all stand up against this hate, and to thank everyone who does stand up against this hate. Finally, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'd like to end by paying tribute to Karen Pollack, CEO of the Holocaust Education Trust, whose leadership and passion continue to inspire so many, to Olivia Marks-Waldman and the team at the Holocaust Memorial Day Trust, who delivered the national ceremony and countless local events across the country, and to the many other organisations who work, enriches and protects the memory of the Holocaust. The Holocaust Survivors Centre in Hendon, the Anne Frank Trust, the Weiner Holocaust Library, the Association of Jewish Refugees, Generation to Generation, the National Holocaust Centre in Newark, the Holocaust Centre North in Huddersfield, and UCL's Centre for Holocaust Education. I ask the House to take a moment to remember the survivors who shared their testimony with us and who are no longer here. Their courage, generosity, and determination to educate others, despite the unimaginable trauma they endured, is a gift to this country. We honour their memory and we wish their families a long life. Thank you.
Yes. Dr. Peter Prinsley to wind up.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It has been an immense privilege and honour to listen to the many brilliant speeches in this House this afternoon. I thank anybody who said anything kind about me. I have made some notes about what people have said, and there is no time to go through all of them, but there are one or two that I just must mention. I think the member for Warrington North spoke with such gravitas. I think she has a future as a distinguished rabbi, should she ever wish to, if she ever wished to go out of politics, which she perhaps won't. The member for Cheadle spoke about Peter Cura, British Empire Medal, who is my sister-in-law's father. He will be so chuffed to learn that he was mentioned here in Parliament, and I thank you for that. The member for Rochdale spoke about the Windermere children, And of course, we all know that story, but Samantha, who was a UEA student, became my close friend, and she's one of the granddaughters of the Windermere boy. And so it was great to hear about that. And of course, the Heaton heroes, we will never forget the Heaton heroes. I would just like quickly, if there's time, to explain that Bevis Marks, which was mentioned, I think, by the member for City of London and Westminster, I'd just like to explain to the House that Bevis Marks actually should be Berry Marks. The City of London Bevis Marks, those were Berry Marks. But now I have to stop. Oh, there is time. Okay, well, in that case, I'll tell you the story. So the great Abbey of Bury St Edmunds had large land holdings all over the country, including land within the City of London, and there were wooden stakes that were put out each year to define the land, and these were called the Berry Marks. And Bevis Marks is simply a spelling mistake. Yeah, so I certainly give way.
You may know that Bevis Mark Synagogue is very close to Berry Street. I wonder whether this is part of your story. My honourable friend's story.
I thank my honourable friend for that information, which I was aware of that. So if there is a little bit of time, I'd like to thank also the leader of Plaid Cymru. I simply cannot pronounce the name of her constituency, but she was correct that we must remember the other genocides. And some of these genocides, for me, really are a memory. They're not history. Many of us can remember several of these. I was particularly taken by the member for Ilford South, who spoke about the expression never again. Never again is, as he has correctly said, a test. It is a test for all of us. What will we do to ensure that it will never happen again? Yes, just finally, I would like to say something about the member for East Kilbride and Strathern, who is just the most powerful advocate for the campaign against anti-Semitism. And if it were up to me, I should appoint her as a righteous Gentile. Thank you.
Well, the question is as on the order paper. Has Mary that appeal and say aye? Or the contrary, no? The ayes have it. The ayes have it. That is the end of the debate on Holocaust Memorial Day. I'll give the front benches a moment or two to shuffle over.